This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. China pledges to speed up the buying of unsold homes in its newest attempt to fix a depressed property sector. Investigations reveal that a fire in a South Korean lithium battery factory that killed almost 24 people occurred because the company ignored warnings of dangerous quality failures. A Taiwan leader, William Lai, on the anniversary of an armed conflict with China 70 years ago, rejects rule by China's Communist Party and vows to uphold the island's freedom. And Japan's central bank chief summoned by lawmakers to explain July's interest rate hike. Kazuo Ueda reaffirming his resolve to raise borrowing costs provided inflation and growth stay on track. And ahead on East Asia Tonight, China this week approved 5 new nuclear power projects worth more than $30 billion, and it can build them faster than any other country. We'll explain what's behind this energy push. And it's been a year since Japan began releasing treated radioactive water from the stricken Fukushima nuclear plant. We take you to the facility where a long and complicated cleanup continues. China's housing regulator pledged to speed up the buying of unsold homes and convert them to affordable housing. It's the country's latest attempt to drag its huge property sector out of a 4-year slump. Well, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Rural Development added that it will push forward renting and selling public homes as soon as conditions are right. It didn't give a target volume. Well, apart from the planned purchases, the Housing Ministry is asking local governments to strengthen the planning and pre-arrangement of such acquisitions for 2025 and 2026. China has also invested more than $61.6 billion in the first 7 months of this year to build 235 projects for affordable housing and urban village resettlement. Beijing is trying to quickly implement a new housing model to put a floor under the prolonged property crisis. And for more, we are joined by Liu Baocheng. He is the director of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. And he is speaking to us from Beijing. And also speaking to us from Beijing, we have our Beijing correspondent, Tan Sihui. So welcome to you both. I'm just going to start things off with you first, Sihui, because you were at the press conference this morning, and they're talking about how this new model of real estate development, it seeks to increase housing supply to meet housing demand. But give us a little bit of context to that. What is it all about, and why is there a need for this new model?
I mean, as we know, the real estate sector is still in a slump, and so there's really a need to inject new measures and stimulus to revive this sector. And so at the press conference, there's this big emphasis telling residents that a house is really for living and not for speculation. And so they're really trying to introduce these measures to increase the housing supply to meet the demand as well as shortage. And so they're ramping up construction. They're also looking at urban planning. They're also planning and studying a new kind of housing pension insurance scheme. And this is really looking at helping to ensure that a person has a steady social security scheme throughout one's person's lifespan. And those were some of the measures that were announced. They were also looking at promoting the building of good homes. And so they're looking at new and innovative ways. They're looking at green and low carbon methods. So let's take a listen.
我们现在城镇的人均住房建筑面积已经达到40平方米了。虽然面积到了4平方米，但是我们对功能、对质量，我们还有新的期待。所以我想呢，在这么一个时候，我们就是要将新一代的信息技术、绿色低碳技术、新型的建造技术等这些新技术、新产品、新材料、新工艺能应用到我们的房屋建设中去。
This is is also part of China's plan to increase the urbanization rate. It's currently at 66%. So they're trying to push it all the way up to 80% by 2035. I spoke to some analysts, and they say that these measures are good, but they are also part of a plan to stabilize the real estate sector so that there will not be seismic shifts. It's also clear that the government sees this real estate sector as an important part of the economy. Previously, it had contributed to about 25% of the GDP, and so the measures are really there to boost this sector.
Let's bring you in, Professor Liu. We've heard what Sihui said, speaking to some of the analysts there. Perhaps we could get your perspective on how this new housing model is supposed to improve the property situation in China, because the government has been selling these unsold homes from developers for a few months now. But based on some latest data, new home prices still fell in July. So how effective is this new housing model?
Well, there are two primary objectives to this program. One is to address some of the imperative social concerns, because many of those prepaid homes are not really delivered on time, and that can really soar up the social disruption, because people are disappointed, particularly the younger generation with a very thin income. And many of them have stopped paying the mortgages. So that's one immediate consideration. And the other is to shore up the Chinese economic growth, because, as Sihui mentioned, the real estate development used to contribute more than 25% of the growth drivers, and now it fell below 10%. So despite of the fact China is moving up in the technological innovation and strengthening its the consumption sector to boost the economic growth, real estate continue to play an important role. And this is also very realistic, because China is still engaged in a very strong urbanization program. More of the people who live in the countryside and work or choose to work at home or live in the cities. So that's something to address the economic considerations. And with that, the government is also trying to step up its own role in addressing these two important considerations by playing a more important role in terms of provision of finance, in addressing the welfare housing, and also in regulating a better ecosystem in the building system. As the government official mentioned, to bring more about the green transformation, digital technology, and more of the building techniques into the design. But on top of that, the a fair and also future-oriented zoning program is also very important, because you see that in many of those cities, there are traffic jams, and the bicycles and tricycles, they are running on the road, and many of the cars are parked on the roadside that can block proper transportation, etc. So overall, I could see one is that the government is getting more aware of the importance of the real estate development in the Chinese economic growth, and also in stabilizing the social security. And second is that there are ready conditions for China to really to use more of the new technology, new techniques to boost the growth and also delivery of the real estate sector.
And I hear what you're saying, Professor, that there are all these prepaid homes that are not delivered on time. People are disappointed. Sihui, so these millions of homes that are left uncompleted since the housing crisis began, were there any measures being mentioned to sort of restart these projects and eventually complete them?
Definitely, there were measures that were announced at the press conference. Let me just give you a figure. We're looking at an estimation of around at least 20 million uncompleted homes. There are some reports that are saying that it has gone up to all the way up to 48 million uncompleted homes. And the authorities are pledging to ensure that these projects continue and are completed. And so they have announced a couple of measures, and one of them is to form a joint force to carry out policy training for local governments and to ensure that housing is guaranteed, and also the financing coordination. They're hoping that the commercial banks will implement due diligence exemption. So they've passed more than 5,300 so-called whitelist projects. These are qualified projects to continue with a loan of nearly 1.4 trillion yuan. And so they've also given assurance that nearly 4 million housing units would be delivered by the end of the year. I've spoken to an economist, and he says that while these measures are really going to help the sector and help to revive the sector, he feels that it's not enough. He feels that these measures are kind of piecemeal, and he says that the government is kind of holding back when it comes to bailing out these companies. I just want to ask Dr. Liu if he feels that it's this way as well. Does he feel that there should be more help from the government, more support from the government?
I think that's a very fair question, because for years there has been different debates with regard to the role of the government in the housing market. Some argue that there should be more collective actions, and there could be tough regulations for the government, and even the government can really play its own role in building houses, etc. And the other more the conservative one would think that the government will also refrain from intervening into the housing market. But the bottom line is that there should be, by basic economic theory, a separation of welfare housing and commodity housing. And government can, as this new measure points it out, can meet more of the demand for affordable housing, which can be modeled based on the Singapore's successful practice, and much more will have to be left to the commercial building, and therefore government can really set up the regulations with more of the specific requirements in terms of the quality, in terms of the financial delivery, etc. So, but the consumers, real estate developers will have to decide on the pricing scheme, and will have to leverage on the market mechanism so that they can play out in a better way that people's needs are really demanded, because the government can be clumsy in calculating the real need and meeting the real need of so many diverse people. So, this document is also there to separate, okay, the government meets the inelastic demand, and then the market is there to meet the diversified demand, particularly for the improved living standard in the housing program.
So, yeah, Professor, we know that the authorities, they've pledged to provide the affordable housing, especially Sure, go ahead.
Let me add. Let me add. With regard to direct financing, I think now the government, one hand, of course, they provide much more of financing to the state-owned companies, particularly those municipal state-owned companies, to address their own local needs. First, to revive those prepaid homes who have not really delivered, and so therefore, when the home is intended to be living, and then before that, those homes who are already paid are really intended to be delivered. So that's a precondition, and then the government can really also streamline some of the banking practices for two important stakeholders. One of course, are those real estate developers. They can really have equal and also more transparent access and more predictable access to the finance, because China has a lot more liquidity at the moment. And then those consumers are also there to have the same access to the bank loans, etc. And so also to define the different responsibilities in case of default between banks and home buyers are also very important. So the legislation and judicial section will also have to be able to brought in to achieve a more justified solution and also to give more better expectation and more confidence to those home buyers.
Oh, lots to digest from your insights there. But thank you so very much. We have run out of time. But I was just talking to Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing and, of course, CNA's Tan Sihui. Elsewhere, police in South Korea say that a fire at a lithium battery maker in June that killed 23 people happened as the company was racing to meet a deadline and that the firm wasn't taking measures to address signs of dangerous quality failures. The fire at Aricell was one of the country's deadliest industrial accidents in recent years. CNA's Lim Yun-suk has more from Seoul.
After 2 months of investigation, South Korea's police say the battery maker Aricell had manipulated samples to pass quality tests since it started supplying products to the military in 2021. But it eventually failed to meet national defense standards in a quality inspection this April.
아리셀은 생산 목표를 달성하기 위한 신규 채용한 비숙련공을 주요 제조 공정에 대거 투입하였고 그 결과 불량률이 대폭 상승하였으며 이전에 없던 새로운 유형의 불량도 발생하였습니다. 여러 공정상의 문제점이 야기되었음에도 별다른 조치 없이 무리하게 전지를 계속 생산해 오던 중에 이번 사고가 발생하였습니다.
Police have charged some 18 people with occupational negligence, resulting in death or injury, including the chief executive of Aricell. The police also said workers were not given enough training on how to escape in an emergency situation. The fire on 24th of June started at a workstation on the second floor, leading to a series of explosions in the battery plant in Hwaseong, nearly 50 kilometers south of Seoul. About 100 people were believed to be working there at the time. It took more than 160 firefighters, along with 60 fire engines, to put out the fire, with President Yoon Suk-yeol calling on his government to mobilize all human resources and equipment. Among the 23 workers who died in that fire were many ethnic Chinese Koreans who had migrated to South Korea to find jobs. They work in many of the so-called difficult, dangerous, and dirty jobs that are shunned by South Koreans. The government has said it will push for mandatory occupational safety training for foreign workers in the wake of the deadly fire. Lim Yan-suk, CNA, Seoul.
A time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Japanese memory chip maker Kioxia gearing up to file a $500 million IPO this year after ditching plans in 2020. And Alibaba's Hong Kong-listed stock getting a lift after shareholders approved a plan that could draw major money from mainland investors. More details coming up next. We're glad you're spending your Friday evening with us on East Asia Tonight. It is now time for Business News with Roland Lim. And Roland, it seems like the Bank of Japan chief today in the hot seat. That's right. Bank Governor Kazuo Ueda summoned to Parliament to explain the BOJ's decision to raise rates in July. And he said the central bank is ready to raise rates if the economy and prices move in line with its forecast. Now, these are his first public comments following the global market meltdown earlier this month. Responding to lawmakers' questions, Mr. Ueda added that the BOJ is closely watching market developments.
もっとも内外の金融資本市場は引き続き不安定な状況にあると認識しております。当面はその動向を極めて高い緊張感を持ちつつ注視していく方針でございます。
The central bank's rate hike in July and hawkish signals after that partly caused the equity crash on the 5th of August. The Nikkei 225 tanked more than 12%. That's its worst single-day performance since the 1987 Black Monday rout. The sell-off spread to global stock markets, wiping off
$6.4 trillion. Now, markets have since clawed back most of those losses. Even then, many BOJ watchers are penciling in another rate hike this year as inflation and wage increases gain momentum. Japan's core inflation picked up pace for a third straight month in July. However, an easing in demand-driven price growth could complicate the BOJ's path towards monetary tightening. Nationwide core consumer price index rose 2.7% on year, excluding fresh food and energy costs. The measure gained 1.9%, coming in below the key 2% line for the first time since September of 22. Now, economists say the higher core CPI reading reflects the phasing out of government subsidies to curb utility bills. When that's excluded, inflation would have eased. Inflation could moderate further as the yen's recent strengthening will push down import costs. Speaking of a stronger yen today, well, it is up 0.11% against the dollar, 146.10, changing hands with $1. The Nikkei, meantime, ending the week 0.4% higher. U.S. private equity giant Bain Capital reportedly moving forward with its $500 million IPO for Japanese chipmaker Kioxia Holdings. Now, Bain is said to be working with investment banks on the plan to list Kioxia in what could be Japan's biggest IPO this year. The Nikkei reported that Kioxia, the world's third biggest producer of NAND flash memory chips, has filed for a listing on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, aiming for an October launch. Now, the listing could value the company at $10.3 billion. This IPO comes amid a surge in demand for semiconductors driven by the booming AI sector. A special purpose vehicle, or SPV, formed by Bain and SK Hynix, owns 56% of Kioxia, which became independent from Toshiba back in 2018. Now, Toshiba owns the rest. The IPO will provide Kioxia with crucial capital to meet rising demand for memory chips, especially as competition in the AI data center market intensifies. The company had previously postponed an IPO in 2020 due to global trade tensions, but is now moving ahead as the business environment improves. It reported record profits in the April to June quarter. Shareholders of Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba have approved a plan to upgrade its Hong Kong-listed shares to primary status from August 28th. The move is expected to attract huge investments from mainland China. The firm, primarily traded in New York with a second listing in Hong Kong, had proposed the idea 2 years ago at a time of heightened geopolitical tensions between China and the U.S. Alibaba made a notable return to Hong Kong via a secondary listing in 2019, but shares have plunged since then and are down about 75% from its peak. A co-founder and chairman, Joe Tai, explained that the listing upgrade was aimed at tapping into mainland China's investment flows via the Stock Connect program, which links the bourses in Shenzhen and Shanghai to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And this would allow mainland investors to buy shares in Hong Kong-listed companies. Analysts say the decision would open Alibaba up to more than 2 million investors and potential capital inflows of up to $19.5 billion the first 6 months alone. It had previously reported a drop in quarterly profits as it struggled with sluggish consumer activity in China and the uncertainty around the company's future that has lingered since Beijing blocked the IPO of its financial arm, that's Ant Group, back in 2020. The stock getting a 1.2% bump on the back of that approval. And that is the business this Friday. Ocelli.
Thank you very much for the report, Roland. Well, in our next news, Singapore's Prime Minister says that he will establish rapport with new and old friends around the world as a key priority amid rising geopolitical tensions. Lawrence Wong outlined his plans as he marked his first 100 days in office. And he says his engagement starts with ASEAN, being Singapore's closest neighbours, and that he will visit countries outside of Southeast Asia in due course.
It's a world with growing fragmentation in the global economy and rising barriers to trade, which means more impact and stresses on the global supply chains. It's a world with a whole range of external threats, including the latest outbreak of Mpox, which we are monitoring very carefully and closely. So in this dangerous and troubled world, our relations with other countries are crucial. and establishing good rapport with friends, old and new, is also a key priority for me.
Mr. Wong also elaborated on what he meant by resetting of policies that he mentioned during his recent National Day rally. For instance, a financial aid scheme for those who have lost their jobs. Mr. Wong says that even as the government makes bold changes for the future, it will not compromise on the core principles that Singapore has held fast to over the past decades.
It could be multiculturalism, it could be an ethos of self-reliance, focus on families, right? These are all important values and fundamentals which we want to preserve. So if we understand what these are, then we don't discard them. We retain them even as we think about making bold changes.
Up next on East Asia tonight, China is building nuclear power plants faster than any other country. We'll speak to an expert about how the rapid rollout is giving China the edge in next-generation technology. You're watching East Asia tonight right here in CNA. China pledges to speed up the buying of unsold homes in its newest attempt to fix a depressed property sector. Investigations reveal that a fire in a South Korean lithium battery factory that killed almost 24 people occurred as the company ignored warnings of dangerous quality failures. And Japan's central bank chief summoned by lawmakers to explain July's interest rate hike. Kazuo Ueda reaffirming his resolve to raise borrowing costs, provided inflation and growth stay on track. China is accelerating its nuclear power expansion, approving 5 new projects this week at a cost of more than $30 billion. While expected to take 5 years to complete, the new plants will be situated in the coastal provinces of Shandong, Zhejiang, Jiangsu, Guangdong, and the Guangxi Zhuang Autonomous Region. Involving 11 reactors, it will be the largest number of units approved since 2019. Well, over the past decade, China has built 39 reactors, increasing total power capacity by about 4 times. The country currently operates 55 nuclear power plants, ranking 3rd globally behind France and the US. But with most of the world's new reactors currently under construction in China, it's on track to surpass the United States by 2030. And for more on this, we are joined now by Dr. Victor Nien. He's co-founder and CEO of the Center for Strategic Energy and Resources, and he joins us from Singapore. So good to have you, Dr. Nien, on East Asia tonight. So let's just talk about when you first heard, China approving these 5 multi-billion-dollar nuclear power projects, and they're going to build them at breakneck speeds. What was your first reaction? I mean, were you thinking, why this rush?
Well, I think it is amazing to see how China has come a long way, from the earlier nuclear scale up, when they first start building the very first reactor in the country. And today they have achieved this success that everybody is watching. And of course, we are also excited to hear that, now there is another giant player that's entering the nuclear race, building continuously nuclear power plant one by one and achieving the national energy and climate goals.
Yeah, so, help us understand this. I mean, before it's like US and Europe, they're kind of at the forefront, right, of the nuclear reactors. So why is it like newcomers, they're outpacing US and Europe in next-gen nuclear reactors? What's behind this shift, do you think, in the global nuclear landscape?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few factors that's contributing to that. First of all, if you look at the stability of the domestic nuclear power project or the power reactor market, China has come a long way in stabilizing domestic policy, supporting nuclear industry development, especially from the perspective of indigenous designs. Japan and Korea was before China, and they were looking at, having indigenous reactors technologies, possibly looking at both domestic and export market. And China has also, had the same intention or ambition. And now China, after quite a long years of technology transfer from the US and France, has managed to pull off their own indigenous designs. And because there is strong support on the national front, looking at industrial development, technology leadership as national strategic positions, China also is committed to the 2060 carbon neutral target. And that has given us, one of the factors that given a strong boost to nuclear power development. And of course, after Fukushima, safety has become the most pressing concern to the nuclear industry. And that also gives opportunity for the development of more advanced reactors in China, given that they have established or consolidated their industrial might in that direction. And that is where, why we're seeing China, including some new, in new countries, so-called new countries, are moving into the advanced nuclear power reactors faster than the existing or established nuclear state.
And, you mentioned there a bit about going green and how nuclear power generators, that seems to be a global trend at this point. And we've seen Japan, South Korea, France, Russia, they've been building more of these reactors. Then, Dr. Nian, do you think that this is the best alternative for zero emissions?
Well, if we take a step back and look at what is the best option based on the national grids that's designed today. Right? In the decarbonization or in the green space, we think about renewables, we think about having more of share of them powering electric vehicles, so that collectively contributes to decarbonization. But we also need to realize that almost all national power grids are designed to accommodate dispatchable loads, and that means they need stable electricity output, and they prefer to have that. And so intermittent renewables produce the kind of challenges which requires energy storage, which requires enhancing the grid, all comes with a cost. And from that perspective, also thinking about the sheer amount of fossil fuel that China is relying on, coal-fired power plants, right? These are continuous running power, and that's needed to power the domestic industry. Right? So if you think about a one-to-one replacement from one fossil energy to a green energy, the nuclear power probably is the only option that can give you controllable, stable, and also economical electricity, especially in the case of China.
So how far has China come with its R&D in nuclear fusion? Because, that is another technological development that, countries are eyeing, trying to get their hands on. And I'm just wondering, so how would you compare China's progress with the rest of the other countries?
I think this is a very interesting topic, and now it's getting more and more exciting, especially around the scientific community. And I have to emphasize that is the excitement within the scientific community. And China is almost no different as compared to any other country like the US, Japan, and those participating in the European nuclear fusion project. Everybody is in the early stage, China included. There has been some reported scientific breakthroughs, in the scientist groupings, for example, in China, in the US. But until today, we are still yet to hear any industrial breakthroughs. And what I mean by industrial is you have something that is close to be enough to be demonstrated, then this will be the technology that can be deployed in the medium term. Let's not talk about short term, in the medium term. And nuclear fusion is still a long way to go, in my opinion. That includes China. There really is still a long runway for this for fusion to get out of lab and become an industrial reality.
And, Dr. Nian, whenever we talk about nuclear power plants, we can't help but, turn our attention to Fukushima and its power plant there and what has happened to it. And safety, obviously, a very big issue. Do we know what is China doing to ensure that it is expanding its nuclear power in a safe, responsible manner?
Yes. Well, it is in the news. Right after Fukushima, China is basically putting on a review of all of its operating reactors and to make sure that they are in compliance with the national safety requirement, and they are indeed state-of-the-art in terms of safety measures and preventing worst-case scenario. So that's what China did right after Fukushima. And of course, in China, over the years, the Chinese nuclear program has seen, for example, Three Mile Island has seen Chernobyl and then Fukushima. So, and nuclear safety, is always the most urgent priority for any nuclear new for any country that is, looking to capitalize nuclear energy. So China is no exception. Even though some Chinese projects has been published as to say, they can complete on time, maybe ahead of time, within budget, there is concerns about whether they meet the safety requirement, but they should know that behind the scene there's a lot of work, both at the industry level, at the regulatory level. And recently, actually not so recent anymore. 2018, China passed the nuclear safety law in the country, and in the form of strengthening and enforcing nuclear safety in the country. And that is also with the ambition that the nuclear safety law would also help the industries to export nuclear power technology and to also serve as a best practice or best example when it comes to commissioning overseas projects. So yeah, there is communications, exchange of information, best practices, in Asia and globally within the nuclear industry. So China is no exception. It's always looking to adopt the best practices, both from overseas and also learn from what they're doing domestically within the nuclear reactors.
It's been great speaking to you, and thanks very much for your insights there, Dr. Victor Nguyen, co-founder and CEO at the Center for Strategic Energy and Resources. Well, it's been nearly a year since Japan began releasing treated radioactive water from its crippled Fukushima nuclear plant into the sea, and it's planning to move on to the next step, the removal of melted fuel debris. Well, preparatory work was supposed to begin on Thursday, but that was pushed back due to a procedural error. Michio Ishida was at the plant earlier this week, and she brings us this.
At the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, contaminated water is constantly created from cooling fuel rods inside reactors and from rainwater mixing with contaminated water. This is stored on site. But with space running out, operator Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, began treating and discharging the contaminated water last August. A year since, the storage tanks here are already dismantled. The plan is to store fuel debris from the Unit 2 reactor here. The 12 tanks in this area, too, are almost ready for removal.
Much of the treated water here has been discharged into the sea. Next, TEPCO needs permission from the Japanese government to dismantle the tanks. After the tanks are dismantled, they will use the space to store debris from Unit 3.
But TEPCO faces the challenging task of removing the melted fuel from the reactors, the result of explosions that crippled the plant following a magnitude 9 earthquake and tsunami in 2011. TEPCO had ordered a robot arm from a UK firm to perform the removal, but delivery has been delayed for 3 years due to reasons like the need for adjustments.
そのロボットアームを待つよりですね、テレスコ式っていう新しい装置を開発して、燃料デブリを少しでも早期に取り出してくるっていうことを目指しました。まずは組成です。ウランだとかプルトニウムだとか、あるいは鉄だとかコンクリート等がどういうふうに存在するのか。
It's believed there are 880 tons of debris inside the crippled reactors. TEPCO expects the entire decommissioning process to take until 2051. But the move to release treated radioactive water has drawn criticism from Japan's neighbors, especially China. That's even though Japan and scientific organizations say the released water is safe. TEPCO says the level of tritium, a radioactive isotope, hovers around 200 to 300 becquerels per liter of discharged water, which falls easily within the government and World Health Organization's standards. It says more than 31,000 cubic meters of water has been discharged into the Pacific Ocean as of March. Michio Ishida, CNA, Fukushima.
Taiwan's leader, William Lai, says that the island rejects being ruled by China's Communist Party and wants to maintain its freedoms. The comments come on the 66th anniversary of historic clashes with Chinese forces, which marked the beginning of the second Taiwan Strait crisis. Taiwan's defense ministry reported that Chinese military aircraft conducted a round of patrols over the Taiwan Strait as Mr. Lai paid his visit. China views Taiwan as part of its territory and has labeled William Lai a dangerous separatist for his stalwart defense of the island's sovereignty. Well, his visit to Kinmen also comes a day after Taiwan announced a record-high defense budget for 2025 as the island seeks to manage differences with mainland China.
别的不说，明年的我们的军事预算比今年还要多，我们年年增加。 我们除了照顾官兵、保障官兵的权益、有更好的生活以外，我们提高训练、购买精良的武器，还有设备，同时跟民主阵营肩并肩站在一起。
Mr. Lai's visit to Kinmen is his first since assuming office in May. Controlled by Taipei, the island sits between the mainland and Taiwan and is located just 5 kilometers from the coast of mainland China. Meantime, Taiwan's top foreign policy officials have reportedly visited the U.S. this week for secret meetings, also the first of its kind since Mr. Lai took office in May. The Financial Times, citing multiple sources, reported that Foreign Minister Lin Chiao-lung and National Security Advisor Joseph Wu were in the Greater Washington area this week for special channel talks with U.S. officials. The report also says Washington and Taipei have held these secret meetings for years as part of a unique diplomatic dialogue between the two. The channel is seen as a rare opportunity for in-depth discussions between high-ranking officials from both sides. Successive U.S. administrations have kept these meetings under wraps to avoid Chinese criticism. Time now for another short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, we turn to the United States, where Kamala Harris has vowed a new way forward as she accepts the Democratic Party nomination in Chicago. Plus, Chinese scientists discover a new way to extract water on the moon, a process that could be key for a future lunar base. You're watching East Asia Tonight. The U.S. saw a rousing end to the Democratic Party's 4-day national convention, where Kamala Harris formally accepted the party's nomination for president with a speech that set the tone for her campaign to try to win the White House in the November 5th election.
On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America. And with this election, our nation with this election has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward.
Well, she sought to draw a contrast with her rival, Republican nominee Donald Trump, and warned of the dangers of allowing his return to the White House.
In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious. Consider not only the chaos and calamity when he was in office, but also the gravity of what has happened since he lost the last election.
Ms. Harris has also accused Trump of wanting to be a dictator.
I will not cozy up to tyrants and dictators like Kim Jong-un who are rooting for Trump. Because, you know, they know he is easy to manipulate with flattery and favors. They know Trump won't hold autocrats accountable because he wants to be an autocrat himself.
China, which America is also intensely rivaling with on many fronts, such as trade and technology, is also on the Democrats' radar.
I will make sure that we lead the world into the future on space and artificial intelligence, that America, not China, wins the competition for the 21st century, and that we strengthen, not abdicate, our global leadership.
And now that Ms. Harris has laid down a broad outline of her policies, should she become president, John Fortier, senior fellow, American Enterprise Institute, tells us which of them spoke to the American people and which may pose challenges to her campaign.
Where I think she is struggling as a candidate, where she had to put her foot on both sides, or on the one hand on the border. She made a case for herself as being strong on the border, but I think that's going to be a tough issue for her. Donald Trump is going to come at her and the performance of the administration very hard. And on foreign policy, broadly trying to paint herself as a strong leader, but that difficult issue of Israel-Gaza, where her party has some divides, and having to say there's some strong things on one side and then on the other, and we'll see how that plays afterwards. But I think the democracy and the abortion issues are ones that are really Democratic motivators that she put first in her speech, and ones that she's going to be putting on the campaign trail as Donald Trump is a threat to. I think the message about standing with Ukraine and standing with allies will be heard well around the world. I think when she comes to debate Donald Trump, he will say, in my presidency, we didn't have these conflicts. I was a stronger leader. I was more of a deterrent to some of these things happening. And that's the debate that will go back and forth. On Israel and Gaza, I think she did her best to say both she's a strong supporter of Israel, but also say that there are problems in Gaza and give credit to both sides. And the convention did not have the very large protests or the disruptive protests that some thought they would. I think that issue, though, is not going away as we come into the fall with college campuses and students coming back. That's an issue that she's going to have to watch for her Democratic Party so that it doesn't split it with some Democrats really coming out in a vocal way as they were earlier in the year. There is the sense that this is some momentum that has come from a new candidate, that she's not had to really present herself to the American people side by side with Donald Trump as she will in debates. And that come Labor Day, come September, that we're going to really have to focus on things. And we still don't really know a lot about her. So I think there's obviously some sort of honeymoon going on now, and they're going to have to come back to a more competitive race in September.
And you can get more on Kamala Harris's speech at the Democratic National Convention by visiting our website at cna.asia for the very latest. Scientists in China have come up with a novel method that they believe can efficiently extract large amounts of water from lunar soil. While analyzing samples taken from the moon in 2020, experts realized that minerals containing hydrogen can be found in abundance. Iron oxide, which contains oxygen atoms, is also present in the soil. And high heat from the sun is all that's needed to get the chemical reaction between hydrogen and oxygen going.
基本上是有一个凹面镜或者是一个费米内尔透镜的方法，将太阳光聚焦，可以加热月壤到1500度以上，把它融化掉，这样就会产生大量的水蒸气。我们把水蒸气收集起来之后，就可以做饮用水。然后同时呢，这个水我们也可以电解，得到氧气和氢气。氧气我们是呼吸必备的一个，这样人类生存就没有问题了。另外，氢气也是一种能源，我们可以把它燃烧或者做燃料电池发电。
Experts predict 1 ton of lunar soil can yield between 50 to 70 kilograms of water, enough to meet the hydration needs of 50 people. While it may just seem like ordinary H2O to us, this method, if it works well, has huge implications for future lunar exploration. It makes plans for stationing personnel on a lunar base more feasible. And having a basic moon station is a goal China's space agency wants to attain by the next decade. But first, these Chinese scientists would like to get testing done directly on the lunar surface itself.
可能最快呢，我们可以在嫦娥8号，应该是在2030年之前发射到月球上。到时候我们有可能去发射验证性的科研装置到月球上去做一些实验。
And that wraps up Friday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, you can always get your headlines anytime at cna.asia. You can find us on Facebook, on YouTube, and on X. Thanks for watching.